Hello and welcome to today's episode of LinkedIn with Louise. And today I have a very distinguished guest coming on with me who I'm very excited to introduce you all to. His name is Christopher Melcher, and if you're in the UK, you may have seen him on GMTV. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Louise, for having me. Just something I always wanted to be on your show, so this is just awesome that you invited me.
Okay, we're going to introduce you properly now because people will be thinking, what are you talking about, Louise? So, Chris, I'm going to let you introduce yourself actually and tell everybody what it is that you do and what your business is.
So I'm a divorce lawyer and I'm in Los Angeles and representing clients in high stakes litigation involving divorce, and been doing this for about 25 years. Got into this niche practice of representing typically very wealthy individuals, business owners, and celebrities, and looking at it from a helping perspective to get these folks through some very, very difficult and personal battle in their life.
Chris, how did you fall into this? Was there somebody in your family who worked in law? Why did you choose law?
My dad was a lawyer. He was a trial attorney. And so growing up, he would talk to me about his cases. He was a prosecutor. And so at a young age, he'd be asking me what I thought about these cases and what arguments he should be making. And through the course of those discussions, it helped develop my legal mind because he was genuinely interested in what I thought.
Yeah.
And so I started to see that I really liked this analysis and how a lawyer can help people. And I remember my dad had a sign in his office said, honest lawyer. And I was like, why the qualification? Why does it just say honest? I had no idea. I just thought all lawyers were great like him. And then, I learned that there were a lot of bad lawyers out there. And so it was through that I wanted to become a lawyer. And it was only through happenstance that I became a family lawyer. I would have never thought that I would go into this line of work. I'm glad I did. It's nothing that I expected it to be.
Do you get quite involved with your clients then?
Well, it's very personal. Everything is at stake. In a divorce, it's people's children and their house, their pay, their future, their savings, and there's personal attacks that are made against them. And so I have to know a lot about them. And the struggle there is to develop this rapport in a way that they'll listen to me while I maintain objectivity. So I can't identify with them. I can't be a cheerleader for them. I need to be an advisor. And so it's certainly a fine line there of knowing them, building trust and rapport without crossing a boundary. So now I'm no longer objective.
Yes. Honestly, you're making me go back to whenever I was at university because I remember at school thinking that law was an area that I was quite interested in. And I've got quite an analytical mind. And when I did my original degree was in geography. But that we'll save that story for another day. But I knew I needed a conversion degree after that to go into my professional career, basically. And I was torn between doing a conversion to law or doing a conversion to work in IT. And I chose the IT, which is how I've ended up where I am. But I completely can see how it must be such a rewarding job, I think.
Well, it can be. I think that there's a lot of burnout among lawyers, and because of the workflow it could be punishing. It's just deadline after deadline. And then the intensity of litigation work, we're constantly at war. And so it took me a long time to find the balance and understand, put this in perspective, because it'll eat you alive. And so there's a distancing that you need to have. It's almost like a paramedic. I mean, arriving at the scene of an accident and seeing all of that trauma, or emergency room doctor, you can't you can't allow that too much in your head because you can't do your job. It'll eat you alive. So that's what I've learned, is distancing myself from the problem. And in simple terms, I didn't create these messes. I'm just there to clean them up.
Okay, I think I maybe was better sticking with IT. So, Chris, you and I worked together earlier this year on LinkedIn. So I would love for you to tell me and everyone who's listening, why did you want to know how to use LinkedIn as a lawyer?
So the pandemic sparked this interest. And so going backwards a bit, my practice was robust. It was so much work. And it was all built through referral network, personal relationships with people, and establishing myself in my niche.
Yeah.
And I had done all forms of marketing, but I was on LinkedIn for a long time, but I wasn't using it. It was just a dormant account. And then the pandemic hit, and I went from being extraordinarily busy to the phone just stopped ringing. It's just like the world just came to a halt.
Wow.
And it was scary. And we went from thinking we're having our greatest quarter in 2020 to we might lose everything. We might have to shut the firm down.
Oh my goodness.
And it was shocking. And I'm sure everyone can relate to that because they all felt the same way in March.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so once we dealt with the immediate crisis of what was happening, I said, well, I'm going to have to reinvent myself here. I'm going to have to find a different way to reach people, because most of the time that I was spent marketing was at conferences and in-person speaking gigs and meeting people, and that was gone. And so how was I going to keep these contacts alive? How was I going to find new ways to market? And that's what started the journey. And honestly, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, because I dove into marketing. I studied everything I could on YouTube, Seth Godin videos. I watched every one of them that I could find, Gary V videos, everything. And I looked at YouTube influencers. How are they using YouTube to reach these large audiences and building it out of nothing? And so it was through that studying that I finally understood marketing. And I saw the things that I was doing that work for me. And I discovered the secret sauce. And then it was like, oh, this is so clear. And through that time, it was really like a forced sabbatical of a month or two that all I did was study marketing. And I learned it. And then I was looking at social media, Facebook, for example, and my partner, Peter Walzer, said, well, hey, you should try, LinkedIn. And I go on there and I'm like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I needed. But then I didn't know how to use it. So then I started studying LinkedIn. And then I found your posts, which were just perfect. I mean, just so clear and great advice, and just some wonderful content that you had there. And then I thought, well, gee, if I could learn from you, then I could really accelerate this process. And you were kind enough to help, and it just took it from there.
Oh my goodness, that is just the best testimony I could get. Do you know what, Christopher? It's really interesting, because when you came into my LinkedIn network, honestly, I think, because my business was this, not dissimilar. It's after, this was going to be the year I was going to speak at events and conferences, and I was aiming for a couple of American conferences. Ironically, I ended up doing some American conferences, except they're online, they're not in person. And it was the same thing. And interestingly, March and April, I think the majority of my clients were very similar to you, and they were UK-based barristers and solicitors who all of a sudden found themselves with some time to learn. And I think I worked with about 3 or 4 people in that arena, one after the other. So it was really fascinating that it all kind of came around the same time. But I think because I have worked with a lot of people who work in the law, I can see that it's different for you because of not the limits of working in the legal industry, but there are precautions you need to take, aren't there? Like what would you say are the challenges that somebody who's a lawyer faces when it comes to marketing themselves?
So this is something that I've given a lot of thought to, and where it started in my head was realizing that some of the most successful lawyers were not good ones. And I thought, how could this be? How could this person make so much money or have so much notoriety as a lawyer and be such an awful lawyer? and because the way I was thinking of this whole time was that I would go to court and I would do really well and people would notice me and they'd want to hire me because I was such a good...
Because you're so good. Yeah.
And that just wasn't happening. And the reason that doesn't happen is because how many people are going to see you in court as a lawyer? There's going to be the judge who might refer one or two cases to you in your whole career. Mm-hmm. There is your own client who's already your client. So maybe they might send one person to you. And then opposing party and opposing counsel probably hate your guts and not going to send anything to you. And then there's the people in the audience who got their own problems and aren't even paying attention. Mm-hmm. So there's no visibility that way.
Yeah.
And so it was the lawyers who knew how to market themselves became successful, not because they were seen doing a great job in the courtroom. And so I also then realized the restrictions that had traditionally been placed on lawyer marketing. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until, fairly recent times, let's say the 60s, 70s, and 80s, mm-hmm. that it was illegal for lawyers to market. They just could not advertise.
Yeah.
And so that stifled the profession. So I think, and I understand, that I guess the concept is that lawyers would have some kind of persuasive power over people. And if they were allowed to market, that they would trick everyone. Mm-hmm. I also think that the profession thought it was beneath them. But of course, neither of those are true. Lawyers are not that persuasive. And we're in business. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong to seek business, but it's been thought that a good lawyer is always busy. And if you're not busy, that must mean you're not very good. So we don't want you marketing yourself. So those things have made lawyers what I call awkward marketers. Mm-hmm. It's taken a long time for the profession to get over that. And I think also some people they're self-conscious, they're afraid to market, they're maybe lazy. And having all of these constructs of, it's beneath the profession, we shouldn't have to market, are just great excuses for them not to market.
Yes. And there's a fear around it as well, I think. From the lawyers that I have worked with, there is nervousness around what do my peers think of me if I kind of put myself out there. And very much what you're saying, Chris, about it's kind of not beneath me, but yes, it's like, well, gosh, if you're having to market, then you must be having issues getting clients. All of those things. It's so true. It's so fascinating.
Well, and I think where the problem comes in is that they don't know what it means to market, and they're confusing it more with advertisement.
Yes.
And that it's like, we're expecting them to take a billboard or a bus bench ad. Or a phone book ad, something like that, that's really tacky mm-hmm. and would never work for most practices.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're talking about. And now what I realized and what I was doing in my firm, I learned from my business partner, Peter Walzer, and he learned from his dad, who was a great family lawyer, Stuart Walzer, was content marketing. I didn't know what it was called until I started listening to these Seth Godin videos. Uh-huh. But what we were doing is we would speak at every conference that anyone would invite us to. Yeah. I would write articles. I would serve on committees. And I would just be publishing my stuff. It's like, here's an article on a particular legal topic.